Dr. Christian Turner, thank you for coming and welcome.
Asante sana John.
Uko mzima?
Nzuri sana. Nimefurahi kukutana na wewe. Habari za jioni.
Thank you so very much for that introduction. It shows your commitment to learning Kiswahili after having been here for only 6 months, I believe. Dr. Turner, you're a new High Commissioner. You were accredited in June 2012. I think this is something of a comfort zone for you, given the fact that before coming here, you've been in the Middle East. And there's already a great expatriate community here, Kenyans who have generations going. Do you feel that these are the people that inform your day-to-day social relationships?
John, I don't, and I disagree that it's a comfort zone. This now is one of our 10 largest embassies in the world in Kenya, which is a sign of how much the relationship in the country matters to us. I'm trained as a diplomat to come somewhere and to try and understand it. And to do that, you need a mixture of things. You need energy and an interest in the country, but you also need a bit of humility. Not a word maybe you always hear from diplomats, and an ability, a willingness to listen and be conscious that you don't know.
But that word listening is of the essence to me, because I'm trying to suggest that you might be listening to the wrong people. You might be listening to a minority grouping and excluding the ideas of the majority because they sort of head you in and say, talk to us, we'll tell you what's what around here.
So if I'm worth my salt, I cannot allow that to happen. If people think that all I do is, as a High Commissioner, is sit in the Muthega Club drinking gin and tonic, listening to a bunch of Mzungus and playing golf, which I'm sorry to confess I don't play golf,
right.
Then I wouldn't be doing my job. The relations between our countries are between all levels. Right. I have to get out of the bubble that is Nairobi. Right. I have to travel down to the coast, up to Turkana. I was in Eldoret just recently. That's my job, is to listen and to speak to all levels. That's why I use social media. I'm on Twitter. A modern diplomat in the sort of 21st century has got to be doing that, or the advice I give back to my capital, back to London, isn't worth it.
Right. Your accreditation speech, it began in Kiswahili as well. Habari mtukufu rais, ni furaha yangu kukutana na wewe. So you've obviously
same phrase, you see, I'm using
got that line down pat. One of the things that came in very early on is the mention of the UK and Kenya mattering to each other. They matter to each other. Now, was that just a very sort of trite phrase to placate us and make us feel good about it? In what way would you think that we matter more than 100 or so other nations of the world?
So there are some countries where you have a number of factors coming together, and the word to emphasize is partnership. We obviously have the shared history. We have the old colonial relationship, we have the shared language, and we therefore have the people-to-people ties. You know, I'm very struck that relations between two countries are not just between ministries of foreign affairs and guys in suits like me. It's between people. It's people who send their kids to university, who go to work. We have about 200,000 Brits who come to Kenya every year. That's the biggest number of visitors of any country, and we have the same in reverse in the UK. So I think that tie is special and that is deep, and that's just a fact. If I was ambassador in Mexico, the historic relationship with Mexico in terms of the former colonial power is with Spain. So I wouldn't have as much of a role. In Kenya it matters. You then have the current issues that tie our countries together. We could talk about defense, we could talk about security, we could talk about regional policy in Somalia. We could talk about this full range of issues.
The elections.
We could talk about the elections.
Let's do that.
Very good.
And another phrase from your speech where it said, you repeat it. What did you say? It doesn't matter who.
It's not who wins, it's how they win.
Elaborate.
My point is that
it's not who they win.
It's not who wins, it's how they win.
Right.
So it is not my job as a foreign diplomat, as an outsider, to come into Kenya and start telling people who they should elect as their leader.
Right.
That has to be a Kenyan choice. And if you look at a lot of the work I did in the Middle East, that was a principle we always respected. So it is for the Egyptian people to decide what happened after the uproar in Tahrir Square.
Right.
We have to respect that sovereign choice. But clearly, if the upcoming elections do not go well, and I must say I'm optimistic, not pessimistic, but if they don't go well, that will not only be bad for Kenya, that'll be bad for Britain's interests in Kenya, which, as I'm saying, are
which is a given, Doctor, it's a given. And I'd like to suggest to you that there is a sort of implicit threat that really means nothing in absolute terms, because there are instances, historical instances, for example, in Rhodesia, if you want to go that, the UDI, the Unilateral Declaration of Independence. They said, you know, Rhodesia, pariah state. They went on swimmingly for any number of years. Zimbabwe, if you think about it, the Sudan. These, if you look in Latin America, Hugo Chavez, you're saying it is condemnation from the West. And I'll take it a step further. When the West condemns, those leaders move to the Far East and to China in particular, and those could be perceived as your adversaries.
No, I don't agree, John, and I don't agree that it's a given. I mean, I get lots of people saying to me, I hear the accusation that you know, the West is somehow interfering in Kenya. And I find this a perplexing point of view, because if you take my word partnership, it is about shared interests. No country in the modern globalized world can be unconnected. The top 10 taxpayers in Kenya, 5.5 are British companies. If you look at the Nairobi Stock Exchange, probably about 40% of the market capitalization.
Which suggests that you've got a lot to lose if that relationship were to be threatened and went elsewhere.
You can play it, you can play it as a positive or a negative. We've got a lot to gain if it goes well. So when I say, I don't think it is self-evident to some people.
Right.
My job, what at heart is my job as a diplomat? My job is to promote UK security and UK prosperity. We're in a terrible recession, much worse. We'd love to have growth figures like Kenya's. My job is to promote that. And if Kenya becomes less prosperous and less stable, that is bad for us. That's bad for my people.
If I could take you back to the earlier allusion to your predecessor, who accused us of vomiting, or of the government, on vomiting on the English
vomiting on my shoes.
Taxpayers.
My shoes are clean today, John. I assure you.
Yes, but forget that. I'm sure they are. But the idea is that that was an element of imposition. Would a Kenyan diplomat dare to say the same thing in Buckingham Palace in some
Yes,
speech?
I think they would actually.
The
whole nature of diplomacy,
right.
The way we come together in international relations as friends, as partners, with the kind of historic relationship I'm talking about, is that because of the shared interests, we have to be able to influence and explain our positions. That doesn't mean that somehow we are interfering and taking over a sovereign choice. So I don't accept.
So if those people who are to go before the ICC, Uhuru Kenyatta, William Ruto, to name names, if the Kenyan people were to elect them in tandem as president and vice president, that is the will of the Kenyan people, presumably the very essence of democracy. And then they say, whatever happens, if you say, smack us on the bottom for being naughty boys and girls, we will continue with the suffering because these are the leaders we want. They could lead us into the unpromised land, but these are the leaders we want. Hence, it's okay. So if they do win, are you suggesting that on that very day, if such, because we're talking here in suppositions, would you then say the British embassy would close? You'd leave?
No, I'm not saying that.
But you should.
No, I'm not saying that.
But you should.
Well, there is an assumption. There are several assumptions in your question. The first is that somehow I have a control over what the Kenyan people do or don't do, which I don't.
Right.
The second point is on the ICC. First of all, I want to be very, very clear. I think my judgment is it is absolutely critical that Kenya carries on cooperating with the ICC process. The Kenyan government has been very clear and committed to that, and the indictees themselves have, I commend them for it, been very clear they do not want to be fugitives from international justice. Kenya must abide by its international obligations.
Doctor, that there are any number of fugitives from international justice across the world, and they're doing very well, thank you.
We could have a discussion, John, across the world. We could also do the history thing. I'm a historian by training, but you've asked me a specific question, and I'm trying to answer it.
Yes.
Commitment to cooperate with the ICC, I think, is absolutely essential. I also want to point out this is a Kenyan court.
Could we go back just one second? Why the essential? Why essential?
Because Kenya must stand by its place in the international community. It cannot be isolated. This is a Kenyan court. The Kenyan people, the Kenyan parliament, sent these cases to The Hague. My country was quite happy to see these cases heard here.
One can renege on an earlier commitment and say, bring those cases to my back door, like Arusha and Tanzania.
I'm trying to address.
You could do it elsewhere.
I'm trying to address the accusation that somehow the ICC is a Western construct or conspiracy. Do you remember the phrase, don't be vague, go to The Hague?
Right.
That was it was the Kenyan.
Drink Hague or something. Since we talked about your shoes earlier on, it was something about whiskey.
It was the Kenyan parliament which sent the cases to The Hague.
Right.
So I think continued cooperation is key. Given what I'm saying, to answer your question directly about what would happen if the Jubilee coalition won the election, and that was the democratic will of the Kenyan people. I think it is wrong for me to speculate at this point
as to what
the outcome would be, because we'd have to deal with those circumstances when we got to them, and I think
I would suggest that you try to re-ingratiate yourself with whichever government what came into power in order to sustain your interests.
I think that's cynical, John, but
well, there is a place for cynicism at times,
well,
because the politics of the world is cynical, otherwise it would be a better place.
But as I'm saying, we should.
You're saying, you know, everything is going really the way things ought to be, we wouldn't be having this conversation in the first place.
But you shouldn't be surprised. It's not really a surprise that I should be wanting to defend British interests. What I'm saying is, given my emphasis on this being a Kenyan choice, I don't think it's helpful for me to come out, and I don't think it's appropriate for me to come out at this stage and say, if X happens, Y would be the case. What I have said, and you know the position of my government clearly, is we support Kenyan cooperation with the ICC. We think that is important. Why? Because an end to impunity and the rule of law is a central part of the new Kenya and the Kenyan constitution, which is one of the most progressive documents of its kind in the world. I have also been clear and honest publicly that the current policy of my government is that I do not meet the ICC indictees unless it is essential. And I don't predict that that policy would change were they to be elected to senior positions in a future.